Corporate Creative in Melbourne. Please give a warm welcome to Annabel Dundas.
Right, this is my least favourite thing to do. So you all have to laugh when you think it's supposed to be funny, okay? Help me out. Thank you, James and Kim. God, they've done an awesome job. I'm in awe of what they've managed to pull together. So today I'm going to talk to you about the art of the pitch. It's the nasty bit of the business, isn't it? Nobody really likes it. I thought I would just start by showing you our show reel though, just because a lot of what I'm talking about is behind the scenes strategy type stuff, but it's always nice to start with something that's moving and loud. So that's our latest reel. As James said, I've been running Tilt for about 18 years, which makes me really old. I opened London in '99 and then I moved home to Australia in 2010 and opened the Melbourne studio. There's quite a few familiar faces in the audience, actually. I don't know if that makes it more daunting or less daunting. Anyway, so for those who don't know about Tilt, though, we're a small design company. We've got a few core staff, but mostly similar to the setup that Tim has. We've moved from having lots of full-time staff to pulling in a great team of freelancers, you know the drill, right people for the right job. Despite being small, we have worked with some pretty big clients over the years, and during that time I have done my fair share of pitches. Big and small projects against big and small competitors. The bad news is, if anybody was coming to figure out how to win a pitch, I really don't think there is a magic formula for success, and half the time it's just dumb luck, flip a coin. But I'll do my best to talk you through some of our approaches and our experience, and hopefully you'll take something away from what I've learnt over the years. So as with everybody, I have a love-hate relationship with pitches. From a creative perspective, they are exhilarating, but from a business perspective, they are exasperating. There's nothing better than getting a great pitch, like a brief for FIFA World Cup, and being excited about getting stuck into coming up with some really awesome ideas. But from a business perspective, there's that whole balance. How much time are you going to invest? Pitches are rarely paid. I think I've been paid for 3 pitches in the last 18 years, and it's always a token amount. So essentially you need to assess your odds and work out how much you're willing to take a punt. It is a balancing act. Let's face it, pitching is gambling. At the beginning of a pitch, I'd say most of us fall into 3 categories: intimidated, ignorant, or arrogant. Intimidated by the sheer scale of work or the competitors that you may be bidding against. Ignorant about how much thought and work needs to go into a well-rounded presentation. Or you're just arrogant enough to think that you can blast ahead and that you're good enough to win it against all odds. I used to sit somewhere in between intimidated and ignorant. But over the years, I have learnt that you can apply a little bit of strategy to a pitch situation to make your odds a little bit better. And of course, the best idea should win, but let's face it, that's not always the case, and the best idea is subjective. So, where do you start? James and I had a conversation about this on social media recently. You ask for the budget. Personally, I think it's way too big an ask to move forward on a pitch without asking and knowing what the budget is. 9 times out of 10, a client will tell me at least a ballpark. This is important because there's no point putting forward ideas which aren't viable. And how can you decide if a pitch is worth working on and investing your time in if you don't know what you're talking about budget-wise? So I always politely explain that it is impossible for us to work on a pitch without some indication of budget parameters. Of course, you get the clients that push back and go, oh no, we're not going to tell you what the budget is. But then in that case, I at least ask for an indication of what they have previously spent on projects, and that will give you at least some idea of what a typical spend for them is for a job. Next thing, how are you going to resource the pitch? As a business, you need to decide if you're just going to work with your internal resources or are you going to bring in a crew. Be realistic about what you need to do to get it over the line. There's no point wasting time and only delivering a half-assed effort because it's just not going to be worth it in the end. Equally, on occasion, we have partnered with other companies. Don't be greedy about a project. Sometimes there is strength in numbers, and if you can partner with another company, but it greatly increases your odds of winning the work, it's definitely worth looking at. And the other important question for me, how many other people are you pitching against? Believe it or not, we were recently one of 22 companies pitching on a project. That's flippin' ridiculous. And I think it's disrespectful of the industry, but anyway, won't go there, don't get me started. And it is the reality of the industry. And I think moving forward, when we've got these large global brands that are taking a pitch to a truly global market, these scenarios are going to get more and more something that happens. Location no longer matters. You're no longer just competing against your neighbours. You're competing in a world stage. We've also been in a pitch before with UEFA where they have briefed everybody in the one room. Call you up, give you the brief, you all rock up to a meeting room and there they all are. There's all of your competitors, which is, interesting. But I don't mind that. It's a very transparent way of being briefed. You know who everybody is. You know their strengths and weaknesses. And at the end of the day, it's nice to be able to evaluate. And it's nice to be able to feel like you're in the same boat as your competitors. And I think in that scenario, there should be some camaraderie. Of course, there's competition, but there should be also some comfort about knowing that you're all in the same place. If you want to get really professional about your pitch, you can do a SWOT analysis. And I think some of us do this inherently. With most briefs, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out who you're pitching against. With a bit of research, it's pretty easy to find out who the client has had a past relationship with and make a few educated guesses. We tend to avoid coming back with ideas that we think the people we're pitching against will also put forward. Most studios have a very particular style or at least some strengths. So use this knowledge to your advantage and pitch something that's completely different rather than going head to head. This will make you stand out. So once you've gone through all of the analysis and you really understand the lay of the land with the pitch, you need to make a call on what your odds are. Then, based on that, you decide how long you're going to spend on a pitch and stick to your guns. Pitching is addictive. And once you've invested in a project, it is hard to stop. So try not to spend more time than you have planned. There's nothing worse than a client who just keeps pushing and pushing and asking for more. You just got to, it's hard, but you just got to stand your ground. So once you've agreed to do the pitch, the questions don't stop. It's good to clarify as much as possible up front. I don't want to tell you guys how to suck eggs, but I like to do a return brief. Depending on what you've been given, I think it's good to do a return brief and clarify anything that's unclear. Target market, competitors, all those usual questions. I also find that it's really valid at this point to clarify if the client's envisaging 2D, 3D or live action. Often clients have a very fixed idea about what they want in their head, and you really have to use every tactic to try and extract that information. Try and understand their lingo. They all have, they'll tell you something and you're like, what exactly do you mean by that? Try and get them to show you examples and send them reference. And the other thing that I always find is helpful is to ask them what they've done in the past that they have felt has been very successful for their brand. So get as much info from them as possible. The other important thing is bear in mind who is briefing you and how far down the line the decision-making chain they are. What is the approval process? Who are the stakeholders? There's nothing worse, and I have been in this situation, than being led down the garden path by the person briefing you only to discover that they're actually not the decision maker and everything they've been telling you is completely wrong. So make sure you're talking to the right person. And if you have the opportunity to meet them face to face, try and take a brief in that scenario and ask as many questions as you can. So in my experience, there's two ways to approach a brief. There's the going solo, and then there's the one, and I want to use the word collaborative, but it's overused, so I've gone for interactive. Option 2 is definitely our preference, and I'll talk you through that in a minute. But sometimes a client is only interested in option 1. They give you the brief, you've got to run with it, and you come back with the big reveal. This is normally the type of brief that we get from clients who are looking for a transaction, not a relationship. Someone who wants to tick all the boxes from a procurement perspective and not necessarily improve on the brief. And it also gives you an understanding in regards to how to respond to the formal side of an RFP. Use less floral language, more straight to the point. This is a risky brief to answer, and sometimes it's nice for a client to be surprised and have their socks blown off. But in my experience, it's much harder to win these pitches with so little insight. Our preference, and what we try to do with most pitches, is develop a much more collaborative approach with our clients. If you can take the client on the journey and you can get them to comment throughout the process, I feel that they become a lot more invested in the job and they feel a lot more ownership. And by the end, they're part of it, and I think this gives you an edge. So what does that look like? We start by hitting them with a million ideas, a really broad brushstroke approach. It's like inviting them into your brainstorm. So not too much work, no style frames, just concepts. Simple paragraphs explaining the idea and the treatment. And what works for us is to use a selection of concept-based visual images to bring the idea to life. But we don't at this stage reference style or execution or whether or not it's 2D, 3D, whatever. It should just be about the overarching concept. That's an example of the type of mood boards we'd put together stage 1. This is for a rebrand of a design company, which had motion as well as branding. This is for brand film. And this is for some idents for BBC Norway. Then you get the client to help you narrow it down. Thank you for laughing. This is when you discover that they hate orange, despise cats, and all of those tiny little bits of information that inadvertently influence their decision, but you could never have guessed or been privy to. So if they help you narrow down the concepts, it increases your odds. And then hopefully you can move forward with one. But let's face it, that never happens. The other thing that I find at this point is that there is an art to asking questions about why they have chosen specific concepts. It's as important to understand why they have discarded something as to understand why they've chosen to move forward with something. You'll make assumptions. I've made assumptions in the past that they've chosen an idea for something particular, and I've been completely wrong. So the art is to distinguish between the business goals and the personal preference, and then try and move forward with that information. So, as I said, as much as you think you can narrow it down to one idea, that rarely happens. They always want you to explore at least 3, and more often, well, you always want to do 2, but they always want you to come back with 3. So this is how we try and structure our 3 ideas, and I'm sure many of you do that. We try and come up with one safe, which instills confidence and makes the client know that you understand the brand, you understand the brief, and you can come back with a relevant solution. Then we'll have a middle one, which is your mainstream one, ticks all the above points, pushes it a little further, but it's still on brand and is slightly less expected and slightly more creative and takes a bit of a leap, but it's still comfortable. And then you chuck in the totally crazy idea. You know that they're never going to go for this one. You know that you've pushed it way too far, but what it does do is show the client how creative you are and the calibre of the company that they're working with. The client secretly wants to go with this idea, but it's way too risky. So you win the job on the crazy idea, but they end up picking the middle one, or the safe one, or a combination of the safe and the middle. The alternative is you get feedback on your brainstorm, you listen to what they say, and then you choose the one that you think is the strongest. Or, and we've done this before, you throw out everything that you've done in the brainstorm, you learn from the feedback that they've given you, and you come up with something completely new. But you move forward with just one big idea that you pour all your energy into. It's risky, but it does show confidence, and I think the clients also respect that. The most important thing I have learnt in 18 years, do not present something you don't want them to choose. You have no idea how many designers I've had upset over the years threatening to quit and go and work at Sainsbury's because they've got frustrated at the end of the pitch when the client has picked the wrong idea. If you don't want them to pick it, don't present it. So once you have your concept shortlisted and you have an idea about whether the client wants 2D, 3D or live action or a mashup of all the above, you need to work out the best way to get your ideas across. And this is the hard bit. Once again, it's this balance, creative versus time, budget, internal resources spent. We tend to use a combination of sketches and style frames and reference to get across the idea, but it is that whole notion of how do you sell it without doing too much and it costing you a fortune, but still making sure you're in the mix. Here are some examples of some pitch work we've done. We haven't won all these pitches, but sometimes you don't win a pitch and you love the board, so you just want to put them out there. So these are the sketch storyboards we did for Rugby World Cup. There was a huge amount of 3D in the concept, and rendering all of that and comping it and doing it all from a pitch perspective was just not viable. But you can see the synergy between what we pitched and what we ended up presenting. They're the final frames from the opening title. This is a pitch that we didn't win. This was for Roland Garros, so that's the tennis, it's the French Open. This pitch came to us as an RFP, all in French. Good times. And we had to respond, all in French. Lucky for us, we had, and this is an example of collaborating with somebody, we had a client who used to be working for FIFA, who had moved out to New Zealand, who was French, and we partnered with him. He's a producer. We partnered with him. He helped us with the interpreting of asking exactly what it was that we needed to do, and then helped us pop the pitch back together again. So with this one, as you can see in the left-hand side, we didn't want to render all of these in full 3D for the purpose of the pitch. It was just way too much work. So we did some indicative layouts of the match graphics, but just referenced what the final look and feel would be. This was the middle option. That's the conservative option. And this is the crazy one that they were never going to go for. But you've just got to put it in there because you've got to have fun. Equally as part of this pitch proposal, we needed to do an opening title sequence. Laura came up with a really awesome idea, but it was just way too heavy 3D-wise to be able to execute style frames properly, so we sketched them. And you just got to, with a pitch like this, we didn't have an existing relationship with the client. It was in French. I kind of feel like you've got to be in it to win it, and I don't like saying no to them, but you've got to weigh up how much time it's really worth spending. So, yeah. These are some sketches for BBC Knowledge, a series of idents that we did a little while ago. And these are the final frames. So you can see a lot of the time we end up quite close. Sometimes they'll come back and it's a total mashup of everything, but a lot of the time you end up quite close to where you started. I find live action really difficult to get across in a pitch because trying to find and source images that you can do a composite mashup and get the idea of the live action across is really difficult. So although we're mostly motion design, occasionally you'll come up with an idea for a pitch that's very live action heavy, and for me the only way to do it is to sketch it. So we've got a few really amazing storyboard artists who work in the UK and in Australia who we'll use and call on for a pitch like this. And generally we would go in with, I can't remember, we had 2 or 3 ideas for this one, and the other 2 were more finished style frames that were much more 3D. This is an example of a pitch that you spend way too much time on. This was World Cup 2010, which we didn't win, but I love these storyboards. And it was just like, we just couldn't stop. It was so addictive, and the client kept coming back going, oh, can we just see an animation test? Oh, could we just see what it looked like this? Oh, could you just try that? And honestly, like 8 weeks later, hemorrhaging money, we didn't win it, bastards. Anyway, move on. This is another example of how we put a pitch together when you're trying to get across the notion of 3D and live action. This is Women's World Cup. This was the brand asset that they really wanted the opening title to reflect. It was a very tight brief in terms of what you needed to deliver. And once again, non-paid pitch. You need to do a set of storyboards. So we chose to do half of them sketched and then half of them as close to being rendered as possible. It's always good with a client if you've got to do a trophy or a logo, if you're going to pick a frame to do the one that makes them the happiest. So we included reference and just trying to give them as much of an idea of what we're envisaging. And then we chose a couple of frames to really bring to life and do full renders. And then once again, you're in that situation. I think that's a Nike, or I don't know what she's got on her foot. You've got to try and do a mashup. Half of the problem with finding the right reference for these things is getting a shot that you can use in a storyboard composition. And so much time spent trying to find the right image. So they're the 2 that we did as proper renders. And as I said, if you're going to pick one, do their trophy or their logo, because that's what makes them all very happy. This was a pitch we did for Discovery. Good old Bobby. And with this one, once again, that notion of finding someone to partner and collaborate with. We went forward with 2 ideas. This is one set of storyboards we did. And then we found an illustrator called Jason Solo, who's awesome. This style of illustration is certainly not something that we do in-house. So we joined forces with him for the pitch, and the client, awesomely, chose this route. So this is the original illustration. They ended up actually referencing the first set of storyboards when it came to Bobby. So they're stills from the final piece. And it was a really lovely job to work on. It nearly killed a few of us, but it was a really lovely job. Once again, another FIFA job. We do a bit of FIFA. This was the 2015 to 18 package. So FIFA do World Cup, and then every 4 years they have a 4-year package that goes out that's 25 matches over a 4-year period. So you can see these are our initial style frames. We won the job, and this is where we ended up. So there isn't that much stretch in the client's imagination. What they end up picking is not that far off where you end up. So the other important thing to do with the pitch is to plan your time, which is hard. Coming up with creative ideas under pressure is never very fun. And there are several stages with a pitch. And if you were to avoid a few all-nighters, and I've certainly done my fair share of those, you need to set yourself deadlines throughout the process and try and stick to them. Also, be aware of the emotions that you go through with a pitch. I think Tim just touched on this before. First of all, you're super excited. And then you're super confident. You've got this thing nailed. And then you buckle down and you start to diligently push forward. And then you get to the delirious stage because you haven't slept. And then you become a little bit confused and you start to self-doubt. And then you find yourself at the point, and I so do this all the time, where you hate absolutely everything you've done. It's all wrong and you want to throw it all away, which is frustrating. Be strong, my friends. These are all natural stages of pitching. And it's really part of doing due diligence on your ideas. And hopefully by the end of the presentation, you can get back to having some confidence in what you've got, present it, and then you fall asleep and don't get out of bed for a week. I find it makes a very big difference if you present in person or if you have to send it digitally. We do a lot of work in Singapore, and having to email a presentation is a whole different ballpark. So the presentations that we do in person, I tend to keep less words in the document, which means that you can engage with the client throughout the process of the presentation. You can also pick up on what they do and don't like. You can tell by somebody's tone of voice when they ask if something's going to do that. It's really, if you haven't got anything committed in text, you can go, oh no, that's not what we meant. What we meant was this. So I think if you can keep it a bit looser when you're face to face, you can certainly steer the pitch in the direction that you want it to go. Do not hand out printed copies of pictures before you do it. So I keep them all to one side. Everybody wants a little carry away, but there's nothing worse than that client who's skipping ahead trying to look at what you've done before you get to it in presentation mode. You want to take them on the journey with you. The presentations that you have to email are harder. So they have to rely a lot more on the words and the descriptions to bring the ideas to life. So for me, any reference you can include from a motion perspective, movement, helps get it over the line. And the other thing is just insist on a phone call. Like there's nothing worse than them just going, yeah, thanks very much, we'll get back to you. I try and insist on a phone call so that I can actually talk them through, because so often they haven't really understood it. People look at something and very quickly make a judgment. And as I mentioned with FIFA, just when you think it's all over, they always come back for more. What is that? How often are you told you're down to the final 2, but they would just like to see an animation test? Or can we have a few more frames developed? We've been in this situation so many times. And do you know what? I'm a total pushover, but these are the times where I try really hard to negotiate a development budget. You know what? If you've started as 12 and you're down to 2, surely they can invest some money. I find that you're in this situation because the person briefing you has to take it further up the line, and they need something that they feel that they can sell. So you talk to them and you work out what it is they feel they'll need to present it higher up the food chain. So when it's all said and done, whether you win or lose, ask for feedback. Given you have most likely worked tirelessly for a ridiculous amount of time, I think that's the least a client can do. Learn from a pitch. Ask what you could have done better. I don't think there's any harm asking if it was a budget-led decision. I know people are a bit nervous to ask this because they don't want clients to think that they're inferring that it wasn't the best idea, but it is the reality of the business. So I always try and ask where we sat, given compared to our competitors from a budget as well as creative perspective. And remember that design is subjective. I never mind losing a pitch if you see what was chosen and it was amazing. And you think, God, I wish I'd done that. Awesome. It's the pitches where they choose something which is totally baffling that wounds us all a little bit. So don't get downhearted. And as much as we like to think of ourselves as artists, I think the reality is that we are in a commercial industry and you can't lose sight of that. That's all. Thank you. I did want to say thank you to you guys because you're awesome.
I'm going to fire it off with a question. So a lot of those pictures you're employing storyboard artists back in London or great concept artists here. You're not getting paid, but I'm guessing you're paying all these wonderful people. So how do you justify or balance all of that out? How much do we invest in these pictures?
It's hard, and it comes out of your profit, and that's why you need to really evaluate before you start a pitch how much you're prepared to invest. In the UK, I'll be honest, we've got a couple of freelancers, and it's less commonly done here. We've got a couple of freelancers who have a pitch day rate opposed to a normal day rate. We've also had scenarios in the past where we've done a pitch day rate with freelancers, and if we win the pitch, then we pay the balance. That tends to be done less here. I don't know if it does. I've never asked, actually. Note to self. it's a killer.
Yeah.
It's a killer.
So you've got to have a bit of fat on the other jobs.
Yep.
To go into the next one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other jobs very rarely have a bit of fat.
Yeah, no fat these days.
No. So that's yeah.
Okay. Any questions in the audience, folks? Mike Tissetto.
That was a great talk. Thank you. Really interesting insights, and you've got some really nice work.
Thank you.
I've just wondered, have you ever thought about just saying no to free pitching?
Oh, I'm so bad at saying no. Yeah, do you know what? We're pitching for a job at the moment, and Sophie in my London office got the brief and the pitch through, and it was the most ridiculous thing. They said, "Do you charge for pitches?" Oh, sorry. Hello. They said, "Do you charge for pitches?" And she went, "Yeah." Yeah. And they came back and said how much, and she put in a fee. Like it was, I think she put £700 to £800, which is nothing because it's like a 2 weeks worth of work. And then they turned, and so after asking, they sent the RFP and they went, "Oh yeah, here we go. Oh, but we're not going to pay you." So then what do you do? Like, what do you do? I'm awful. Have I ever said no to a pitch? No. The one that we're up against 22 people, like what? Do you know what? I didn't know at the time, and if I had known that, I probably wouldn't have done it. I think you tether how much time you spend on it. So if I've got a freelancer in and we've got half a day at the end of the job and you've got a pitch in, you'll go, "Oh, can you have a quick look at that?" Mm-hmm. But then sometimes it's just not worth. It's not worth spending. You either got to go for it, or half-assed work doesn't necessarily cut it at the end.
This is very exciting. We've got a question on Twitter.
Is it Twitter?
This is very 2016 from... Oh, hang on. And now I'm getting a phone call.
Oh, quick, go take it.
Should I take it? No, it'll probably be some sort of, spam. So from Fox, question for Annabel. How many pitches do you do a year, and how often do you win the pitch, percentage-wise?
Do you know what? I knew someone was going to ask me percentage-wise, and I was going to sit down and try and calculate it. I have no idea. How many pitches a year? Totally varies. I'm going to say 3 to 5. Not that many. Not huge. Okay. The big ones only come around every 4 years. Like we tend not to pitch on little jobs. I'll submit a quote on a little job, but it's when people start asking you to pitch for $5,000 to $10,000 jobs. That's just make a decision. Don't be ridiculous. It's the big ones, and the big ones are hard to say no to. If it's a 4-year FIFA package,
it's a big carrot in front of you.
It's a really big carrot. But I suppose if you win 1 out of 4, you look at your odds. If you're one of 5 companies pitching, you kind of figure you get 1 out of 5. If you're 1 out of 22, like.
So what do you think your percentage success rate is over the years? You win 20%, 50% of them? Not 50. I'm going to say 20 to 30. Yeah, and I think that's a reflection of how many people you're up against as well. Yeah. And is it the broadcast industry that requires the pitches more than, say, web explainers and things like that?
Oh, no. Web explainers and brand films I don't think we've ever pitched for. I've submitted quotes for.
Because they're more 10 grand type.
Yeah. And even with that, they'll say, submit a quote, and you'll go, what's your budget? And they'll go, oh, no, you've got to submit a quote. And I'll go, yeah. What's your budget? And they say they're never going to give you a budget. They always give you the budget.
I need your help. They don't tell me. Any more questions from the audience? There's heaps. Matthew Packwood.
You said you weren't very confident. That was excellent. Well, you delivered. Yeah.
It's so not my favourite thing.
I just wanted to know, avoiding pitches. Basically, for 5 years, I never pitched, and my salesperson hated me for that. I was just wondering, do you have any techniques or ideas on avoiding a pitch and winning the work without pitching?
So many of the big governing bodies, it's part of their procurement process. And I think the ones that they have to pitch, you have to try and build a relationship. Roland Garros, we were never going to get because they'd never worked with us. And I do firmly believe that you've got to really come in from somewhere amazing to win a pitch with someone that you have no existing relationship with. I don't know how you avoid it. I think you just build relationships with clients and you continue to deliver and over-deliver, which is what we do a lot of, and be really crap at never saying no when they ask for stupid changes, and therefore they'll just keep coming back to you, is my hope. That's my business strategy. Be really crap.
Any more?
Hi. I've been told recently by the great Patrick Clare that and he was referencing a mentor of old, I'm not sure who it was, but he told me that if you can't explain your idea in one sentence, then you yourself don't know what it is that you're trying to pitch. However, I think it's crazy to condense any kind of idea into one sentence, and I just wanted to know your thoughts and if you think that needs to be possible as well.
I think that's we try and spend a lot of time up front on the concept. So we try, and it's hard because when you come up with an idea as designers, you do immediately start to think about how it will look, how it will feel, 2D, 3D, live action. But we try really hard to go back and get the concept right at the very beginning, which is fundamentally like a single line manifesto of what you think that's about. So yeah, I think you should be able to do it. I think it depends on what the brief is, but I would say 90% of the briefs we have worked on, we come back with a single, per concept, we'll come back with a single idea. Whether or not you can articulate it in a single sentence, maybe two, some keywords, a bit of bold, nice picture. Yeah.
This is exciting. We've got another question on Twitter. This is working. Keep your questions coming on Twitter. Annabel. Oh, they've spelt your name wrong there. This is from...
It's on the screen. Come on, guys.
This is from Paul Davies, name and shame. Annabel, how do you look after your team through the year? Hard work versus reward and appreciation for long hours.
Oh, I brought them here today.
Are they all here?
Laura.
Laura, one.
Hi, Laura.
And some of the freelancers are here, I think.
Yeah, I'm also taking Laura to AGDA in Adelaide tomorrow.
Wow.
So we can get drunk.
Wow. Are you going to get drunk tonight?
No, I'm going home to pack for Adelaide. No, yeah.
You can pack
I'm
drunk.
not very good drunk.
Packing drunk is fantastic.
Oh, that could end badly. How do I look after the team? Do you know what? That's a really valid thing. And I will totally hands up and confess, wherever Paul is, hi Paul, that you do, over the years sometimes you get so bogged down in work, and sometimes you, and personally, I get so bogged down with work and small children and renovating a house and balancing London and Australia, and it's really important to remember to thank the people who work for you. And it is something that I forget to do. Thank you, Laura. So, yeah, it is. And I think...
So what do you do? Barbecues, free beer...
I try and buy lunch
sandwiches?
quite a lot on a Friday, especially
Nice.
if we've got big pictures due or people are working on big deadlines.
Yep.
I try and bring in lunch.
Hugs.
That would be awkward. Yeah, no, it's a really important balance.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. Question...
Thanks for that, Annabel. That was great. I guess a question that I've got, and this almost goes back to Tim as well. When you're doing a pitch or when you're pitching for a client and they go, you've been doing this for insert arbitrary time period here. You should know how long it takes to do anything. And I sometimes find if you're doing a job, you only know how long it takes if you know you're not going to learn anything while doing it, because then you can absolutely account for how long. And you go, yeah, sure, it'll take 2 weeks and cost you $500. How do you, if you have to pitch and then you actually have to get the job, how do you get around that? How do you quote a time that's both reasonable enough that the client goes, oh yeah, and reasonable enough that you don't absolutely lose your marbles about 2 weeks before it's due?
I think when you pitch for a job, quite often you put forward 3 ideas. I'm so lazy. I don't put in 3 budgets. Sometimes I do, but most of the time I'm just like, you know what, an ident's this much. And then you work backwards. I think every idea is scalable in terms of the level of detail and the level of time you can spend on it. I think you put forward a budget that you know ultimately with a bit of research, the client is going to spend, and then I think you scale your idea based on that. I mean, we would all love never-ending budgets, and we could all work on jobs for the rest of our lives. And this is the balance from an art and a commercial perspective, and a creative and a business. I struggle a lot because I'm creative, but then I also own the business. So it's that constant, like, I want it to be, I'm Jekyll and Hyde. I want it to be awesome, but also I don't want to lose money on this. And I think over the years you get better at that. We've got systems in place in the office which we're really, sometimes really good and sometimes not great at using. So we use Workflow Max to try and track hours on a job. And you know what? I think we're getting better at staying true. If you set yourself milestones throughout the project, then you can kind of keep track on it. Things like Dino Ventures, and Keki, who's right behind you, worked on that. Hi, Keki. There's projects that you learn from. It's the long-term ones that you feel like you've got shitloads of time at the beginning, and then you get to the end and you're like, oh my God, how do we get here? And how come we haven't finished this much? Yeah, you've just got to set yourself deadlines throughout it.
Anyone else? Sam?
Hey, Annabel. Thanks.
Hi.
I just wanted to ask, in terms of when you get the brief and your client wants you to go down that kind of solo track, is there a way of kind of swaying them towards?
I try. You can tell if they're interactive or not. Do you know the first big FIFA pitch we did? I did my approach. And this is a methodology we've been using for nearly 20 years. And so I sent over the brainstorm ideas, and I remember Dan, who was the client, who we were 1 of 12 when we won the first FIFA job. I was totally the wild card. I was like this pregnant, and then like turned up to FIFA and took my coat off and stood up with storyboards so no one had noticed. Anyway, and you're like, why are they ever going to give this?
It wasn't a soccer ball.
No, why are they ever going to give this to some crazy Australian? You try and engage. Some clients just don't understand what you're trying to do, and sometimes it really does fall on deaf ears, and they'll come back, and sometimes they will come back and go, oh, no, I don't understand any of it, I don't like any of it. But you know what? Any bit of feedback you get from them is insightful.
Yep. But in terms of kind of that first contact, is it just like an email, or is it a call, or like do you send an email and follow up a call and go, here's some work?
I'm so old school. I try and phone. I know that's not what... do you know what I find really interesting? Over the years, I remember the first time a client emailed me to tell me I hadn't won a pitch. And we had poured our heart and soul into this job, and we'd spoken to them on the phone, and to get an email, not even a phone call, and you're like, are you kidding me? You've emailed me to tell me I haven't won it. And I was thinking about it the other day, and like nearly 20 years on, it's a totally acceptable thing to do. I still think it's rude.
It's like breaking up by text.
So rude.
That is rude.
I try and call. It's tricky though, because a lot of these people are really busy. So sometimes I'll send an email and say, may I call you, and can you tell me an appropriate time? So I'll follow up with a phone call, but I won't just randomly ring them. Yeah.
Cool. Another question on Twitter, thanks to Jason James. Annabel, a lot of your work is overseas based. Is that just because there isn't enough work in Australia?
No, yeah, I would say. Yep. It's because I've got really good competitors here. I just, I find it difficult. You move home and you haven't been here for a little while. The biggest thing I found when I moved back to Australia is this, I'd been in London for 15 years. We'd been working with FIFA, UEFA, all sorts of international clients. To go over to Switzerland was just not that big a deal. What's with Sydney, Melbourne? You go and see a Sydney client, they're like, ooh, you're from Melbourne. Mm. You're like, yeah, it's like 45 minutes on a plane. Oh, it's a slight exaggeration. Right? It's an hour and a half. Yeah. Whatever.
There's the internet.
There's this weird, it's like, yes, we have telephones. And we have internet and email. Yeah, it's this really weird thing in Australia where it's quite, I'm not going to say you're all parochial, but you're all parochial. I think things have changed. I think when I came home in 2010, I went to Sydney. There's a lot more work up there. We do a lot of sports stuff. A lot more of the event companies and the people we work for were Sydney based, and it it was revolutionary for them to go, oh, what, you're in Melbourne? You don't want us to use the people next door to us? So that's just how I have always worked. I haven't necessarily, of course I've looked at clients in Melbourne and I do work with people here, but for me, you look at where the opportunities are and they're not necessarily in your backyard. And I think that's, that 22 people pitching, that was literally the top 22. That's someone on Behance, I'm sure, going, the top 22 people in the world. We're just going to get them on this pitch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So does that mean a lot of travel for you, Singapore and Europe?
No.
No?
The thing I do find, I'm going to Promax in Singapore in December. The thing I do find about Asia is no amount of emailing them will actually get you over the line. You have to shake their hand. Give them your business card with two hands. It's a different way of doing business, but I think you go once or twice a year.
Yeah,
and that's
so you
totally
go to a
fine.
conference like Promax and do a lot of networking.
Yeah.
Yep, fantastic. All right, I think we can... One more. I'm just torturing you. One more question.
When you look for storyboard designers, do you expect them to come up with an idea, or do you try and find a designer who fits a style you're after?
I think we do the concept stuff in-house most of the time. So I've got I'm going to say 80% of the time. It depends on the pitch, depends on the time frame. And then do you know what? I'm always looking for awesome freelancers. I've got a few people I use on a regular basis. They know how we work. And I spend a lot of time looking for awesome people. A lot of it comes down to who's available. If I've got a particular job and it's more 3D, I'll certainly pick somebody, if they're available. It's a balance. It's a balance of who's available, what you need, and how far down the line you are concept-wise.
All right, let's give Annabel another round of applause.